At my appointment, the doctor asked about my bruises. My daughter jumped in saying, quote, "She's clumsy and falls a lot." I stayed silent, but when the nurse came in alone, I handed her a small, folded note. The note had my lawyer's phone number. She had no idea what was about to hit her. Thanks for watching my stories. I hope you find this one enjoyable. The silence in that sterile examination room was a living thing, a thick, suffocating blanket woven from my daughter Fiona's lies and my own calculated patience. Dr. Evans, a kind woman with worry lines etched around her eyes, gently palpated the deep, plum-colored bruise blooming on my forearm. It was a nasty one, a perfect handprint left behind from when Fiona had grabbed me to stop me from answering the phone the day before. "And this one here, Agnes?" Dr. Evans asked, her voice soft but persistent. Fiona, perched on the stool beside the examination table like a vulture in a floral dress, jumped in before I could even draw a breath. "Oh, that was the pantry door," she chirped, her voice a symphony of false concern. She was reaching for the crackers and misjudged the swing of the door. "Weren't you, Mom? Her depth perception isn't what it used to be." I just looked down at my hands, my face a carefully constructed mask of placid confusion. I let my silence be her confirmation. For the past 2 years since my husband passed and I'd had a minor health scare, Fiona and her husband Derek had moved into my house to take care of me. Their care was a form of methodical erosion, a slow, patient dismantling of my life, until all that was left was a shell of a woman who was clumsy and fell a lot. They started with my mail, then my finances, then my friends. My world, once a sprawling landscape of intellectual curiosity and social engagement, I was a research librarian for 40 years, had been shrunk down to the 4 walls of my own home, a prison where my jailers called me Mom. Fiona saw my life savings not as a nest egg I had meticulously built, but as a trust fund she was tragically being denied access to. Derek, a man whose ambition had fizzled out in his late 20s, saw me as a walking, talking obstacle to the early retirement he felt he was owed. They operated as a seamless unit of passive-aggressive tyranny. My meals were what was convenient for them to prepare, my television was always tuned to their shows, and my telephone calls were monitored in case of scammers. The bruises were just a physical manifestation of their psychological campaign. A fall in the hallway after I questioned a large withdrawal from my checking account. A bump against the kitchen counter when I asked why my oldest friend's letters were no longer arriving. Each injury was accompanied by Fiona's suffocating, cloying sympathy, a performance for an audience of one that was designed to make me question my own reality. But a librarian knows things. We know how to find information, how to catalog it, and how to protect it. For the past 6 months, I had been a secret archivist of my own decline. I kept a small, coded journal tucked inside a hollowed-out copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. Every incident, every threat, every missing piece of jewelry, every fall, was documented with the dispassionate precision of a cataloger. I also had a small, voice-activated recorder, a gift from my late husband, that I kept hidden in my knitting bag. It had captured hours of Fiona and Derek's private conversations, their greedy planning, their open contempt for the old woman who was taking too long to fade away. They thought I was losing my mind, but my mind had never been clearer. It had become a fortress, and I was just waiting for the right moment to lower the drawbridge and unleash my army. The doctor's appointment was that moment. I knew Fiona would have to be there to manage the narrative. I also knew there would be a moment, a brief, fleeting window, when I would be alone with the nurse. Her name was Maria, a young woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that saw more than she let on. As Dr. Evans left to get some paperwork, she gave her usual instructions. "Maria will be in to take your blood pressure and give you your flu shot." Fiona stood up, stretching theatrically. "Perfect. I'll just run down to the cafeteria and grab us a coffee. Mom, you be good for the nice nurse." She breezed out of the room, leaving a trail of cloying perfume and lies in her wake. The moment the door clicked shut, Maria turned to me, her professional smile softening into something warmer, something genuinely concerned. She prepped the blood pressure cuff, her movements efficient and quiet. As she leaned in, her arm brushing against mine, I made my move. My hand, the one without the handprint-shaped bruise, slipped from my lap. Tucked into my palm was a tiny, tightly folded piece of paper. With a swift, practiced motion, a sleight of hand I had rehearsed in my mind 1,000 times, I pressed it into her hand as she adjusted the cuff. Her fingers closed around it instantly. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I saw a flicker of understanding, a silent acknowledgement that a message had been passed and received. She said nothing. She just gave my arm a gentle, reassuring squeeze, a pressure that was the polar opposite of the one that had left its mark on my other arm. She took my blood pressure, administered the shot, and updated my chart. When Fiona returned, juggling 2 cups of lukewarm coffee, we were just 2 women finishing a routine medical procedure. "All done?" Fiona asked, her voice bright and brittle. "Her pressure was a little high," Maria said, her tone perfectly neutral as she disposed of the needle. "The doctor might want to adjust her medication." Fiona sighed dramatically. "See, Mom? It's all the stress you put on yourself. You just need to relax and let me handle things." I just nodded, a frail, confused old woman who couldn't even keep from walking into doors. But as Fiona guided me out of the clinic, her hand gripping my elbow a little too tightly, I felt a sensation I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't hope. It was the cold, clean, and deeply satisfying certainty of a lit fuse. The note didn't contain a desperate plea. It contained a name and a phone number. The name was Robert Maxwell, my late husband's estate lawyer, and he had been waiting for this call for a very, very long time. 2 days after the doctor's appointment, the doorbell rang. It was a Tuesday morning, and Fiona and Derek were in the kitchen, engaged in a heated, whispered argument about a credit card bill. I was in the living room, pretending to watch a game show, the hum of the television a perfect cover for the frantic thumping of my own heart. Fiona, her face a mask of annoyance, stomped to the door and flung it open. Standing on the porch were 2 women. One was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in a practical blazer, and the other was a uniformed police officer. "Good morning," the woman in the blazer said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm Sandra Willis from Adult Protective Services. We've received an anonymous report expressing concern for the welfare of Mrs. Agnes Parker. May we come in?" Fiona's face went through a remarkable series of color changes, from flushed red to a pale, sickly white. She tried to block the doorway, her body language shifting from entitled homeowner to cornered animal. I don't understand," she stammered. "My mother is fine. She's just a little confused sometimes. There's no need for this." Miss Willis's gaze was unwavering. "Then you won't mind if we come in and see for ourselves, will you?" The sight of the police officer's hand resting casually on her hip was all the motivation Fiona needed. She stepped aside, and the 2 women entered my home. The next hour was a beautifully executed piece of bureaucratic theater, orchestrated from afar by my lawyer, Robert. Miss Willis was a master of her craft. Her questions were polite but surgically precise. She asked to see my bedroom, my bathroom. She noted the lack of a handrail in the shower, the very place I had taken my last fall. She asked me, in front of Fiona and a now panicked Derek, when I had last spoken to my friends. "Oh, Mom doesn't like talking on the phone much anymore," Fiona interjected, her voice a little too high. "It confuses her." Ms. Willis just made a note on her clipboard. She then asked if I ever felt afraid in my own home. I looked at Fiona, at her face now a rictus of forced pleasantry, and I gave the answer I had been saving for this very moment. "Sometimes," I whispered, letting a single, genuine tear roll down my cheek. "Sometimes I get scared when I fall." That was all Ms. Willis needed. She turned to Fiona and Derek. "I believe it would be in everyone's best interest if Mrs. Parker were to be temporarily relocated to a neutral environment while we assess the situation further. It's a purely voluntary measure, of course," Fiona exploded. "Voluntary? This is ridiculous. She's my mother. You can't just take her. She's not in her right mind." But Ms. Willis wasn't talking to Fiona anymore. She was looking directly at me. "Agnes," she said, her voice gentle but clear, "would you like to come with me? We have a lovely suite available at a very nice residential community, just for a little while." I nodded, my heart singing. "Yes," I said, "I think I would like that very much." The hour it took me to pack a small bag was an agony of triumph. Fiona and Derek followed me from room to room, their whispers now a frantic hiss of accusations and threats. They were no longer my caregivers. They were my captors, watching their prize asset being escorted out the front door. As I stepped out into the bright sunshine, I turned back one last time. They stood in the doorway of my house, their faces contorted with a mixture of rage and disbelief. They had lost. They just didn't know how badly yet. The moment I was settled in my temporary new home, a beautiful, sun-drenched apartment with a view of a garden, Robert launched the second phase of the attack. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, a courier arrived at my front door and served a stunned Fiona and Derek with an eviction notice, giving them 72 hours to vacate the premises. At 4:15, their joint bank account with me, the one they had been systematically draining, was frozen. At 4:30, the locks on the house were changed. I had the supreme satisfaction of watching it all unfold on a live feed from the security cameras Robert had instructed me to have installed a month prior, cameras that Fiona and Derek, in their arrogant certainty, had never even noticed. They were trapped. They were homeless, penniless, and locked out of the very home they thought they controlled. Their entire world had been dismantled in the space of an afternoon. But the true masterstroke, the piece of evidence that would turn their greed into a potential criminal conviction, was still to come. In my hollowed-out copy of the Count of Monte Cristo, along with my journal, was a series of notarized affidavits from my neighbors, my pharmacist, and even the mailman, each one detailing their own concerns, their own observations of Fiona's controlling behavior and my increasing isolation. They thought I was a frail, confused old woman. They had forgotten I was a librarian, and I had meticulously cross-referenced my own downfall. The final confrontation did not take place in a courtroom. It took place in the polished, intimidating confines of Robert Maxwell's boardroom. I sat at the head of the long, gleaming table, a position of authority I hadn't occupied in years. I was dressed not in the drab, shapeless clothes Fiona preferred for me, but in a sharp, tailored pantsuit. I felt like myself again. Fiona and Derek were escorted in by Robert's paralegal. They looked like they had been dragged through a hedge backward. They were haggard, angry, and radiating an aura of impotent fury. They had spent the last week living in a cheap motel, their credit cards declined, their world reduced to the size of a single grim room. They sat down opposite me, their expressions a mixture of resentment and disbelief. Fiona spoke first, her voice dripping with the venom of the deeply entitled. "This is insane," she spat, glaring at Robert. "You can't do this. We have rights. We were her caregivers. We have dedicated the last 2 years of our lives to her. We are owed compensation for our emotional labor, not an eviction notice." It was a stunning performance. There was no remorse, no apology, just the raw, unadulterated grievance of a parasite that had been forcibly detached from its host. Derek, ever her echo, chimed in. "We were managing her estate. She was a danger to herself. All those falls, we were protecting her from herself." Robert let the silence hang in the air for a moment before he spoke. "Protecting her?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous purr. He slid a glossy photograph across the table. It was a high-resolution image of my forearm, the handprint-shaped bruise in vivid, undeniable detail. "Does this look like a fall to you?" He then produced a small digital audio player and pressed play. The room filled with Fiona's voice, a recording from 2 weeks prior, captured by the device in my knitting bag. "If the old bat doesn't sign the new power of attorney soon, we're going to have to get more persuasive," her recorded voice sneered. "Derek, she has almost $1 million in that retirement account. That's our money. We've earned it." Fiona's face went completely white. She looked as though she had been physically struck. Robert didn't stop. He produced my journal, my Count of Monte Cristo, and laid it on the table. "And then there's this," he said. "A meticulously kept log of every fall, every threat, every dollar you siphoned from her accounts, along with signed, notarized statements from half a dozen witnesses who were concerned enough to document what they saw. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto theirs. So here's the situation. We have enough evidence to press criminal charges for elder abuse, fraud, and theft. The district attorney is very interested in this case. You will go to prison. He let that sink in. I watched as the last vestiges of their defiance crumbled, replaced by the stark, animal terror of the truly cornered. Or, Robert continued, you can sign this. He slid a thick document across the table. This is a legally binding agreement. You will relinquish any and all claims to your mother's estate. You will be formally disinherited. You will sign a permanent restraining order, forbidding you from ever coming within 500 feet of your mother again. You will walk out of this room with nothing but the clothes on your back, and in return, we will not pursue criminal charges. They were trapped. Their greed had led them into a cage of their own making, and the door had just slammed shut. Fiona picked up the pen, her hand shaking with a rage that had nowhere to go. She signed, her signature a vicious, angry slash of ink. Derek followed suit, his movements slow and defeated. They stood up, their faces empty, their futures a barren, empty landscape. They were no longer my children. They were just two strangers who had once lived in my house. They walked out of the room without another word. The silence they left behind was clean, pure, and filled with the promise of a new beginning. I looked at Robert, and for the first time in a very long time, I smiled. It was a real smile, a smile that started in my heart and spread to every corner of my being. My ordeal was over. But my story, the one I was going to write for myself from this day forward, was just beginning.